Today, we are stepping into a topic that's just about on every teacher's radar at the moment, AI. You can hardly open a newspaper, not that anybody does that anymore, or scroll through social media without seeing bold claims about how artificial intelligence is about to transform education forever. But what does that actually mean if you're a primary teacher stood in front of a class of 30 on a rainy Tuesday afternoon trying to make sense of fractions? My guest today is going to help us unpick all of this. I'm joined by somebody who spends his working life right at the intersection of education and AI. And he has a strong background in mathematics, which is ideal for us. My guest today is Twinkl's National Education Lead for AI, Simon Bond, and I'm delighted to have him on the show. Welcome, Simon.
Thank you very much for having me, John. Been really looking forward to this since you invited me on, and I can't wait to talk both maths and AI, two of my passions.
Yeah, to be fair, AI I find particularly useful, even for things like this podcast. We were just talking about it a couple of moments ago about how brilliant the software is that behind this show. I know I make it look easy, but even just getting through that introduction, as Simon will attest, took me about 3 attempts. So without the AI power behind this editing software, my life would be considerably harder. But when I was teaching, I found AI to be more useful at some of the admin tasks around teaching and less useful for the actual teaching side of it. So I'm really curious as to how that might evolve, might have already evolved in the time that I've been out of the classroom in the last 6 months. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Simon. Before we start with any of that, let's go back to a time before AI, not that long ago, but still. What was maths lessons like for you when you were at school? I'm thinking primary school and into secondary.
Yeah, well, as you've already talked about, I originally, before I got into EdTech and AI, I was a secondary mathematics teacher. So you're probably imagining I'm going to say absolutely loved maths throughout school, and yeah, go on. Actually, to a certain extent, I really, really did. Yeah. I loved maths in primary school, loved maths in secondary school as well. And I know that recently you had our colleague Pete on as well, and kind of talked about that jump up from secondary to A level. And that very much matches me as well. I was a little bit of a coaster through primary and secondary, but possibly achieved quite well. But then the jump to A level I found absolutely huge. Not to say that it wasn't without its little bumps in the road. I mean, there's a lot talked about and a lot of research, as you'll be well aware of, into maths anxiety. And I definitely felt that. I think I was quite good at maths. I think, the other children in the class would have said, oh yeah, Simon's really good at maths. And consequently, I put an enormous amount of pressure on myself to get things right, if you will, whatever right is, within learning maths. But yeah, I love maths at school. I remember all my teachers that inspired me, and continue to love it to this day.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've spoken to a couple of people now. One, Dr. Heidi Kirkland, for this podcast, our first ever episode, actually, which, if anybody's interested in maths anxiety, well worth going to have a listen back to what she had to share, because it was fascinating for me as somebody who didn't enjoy maths and was a little bit anxious about it, possibly because those two things were related. She spoke, as you have, about the fact that it's not necessarily linked to ability or attainment in maths, and that people who have good attainment in maths can also find themselves struggling a little bit with it. So yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks, Simon. But I'm not surprised that you enjoyed maths at school. I think it's a natural progression to end up from being in the class enjoying maths to teaching the class enjoying maths. And I'm sure you were just as enthusiastic for your students then. So why AI then? You were a maths teacher. Now you are a national thought leader when it comes to AI. How has that happened? And what do you do, Simon? We should just clarify for people what your role is as well.
Absolutely, yes. That kind of day-to-day role. So new role, as a lot of the education lead roles are to Twinkl. This is quite a new role for everyone. And certainly for me, I'm coming in at a time when Twinkl started to use AI, some AI tools and some AI alts, the way that they kind of manipulate the resources that we've got on the site. And I'm here just to provide some kind of vision and strategy to that, to kind of, like you said, really bridge the gap between the teachers in the classroom and what we provide. And I think that's still to be decided. This is still a very new area, and something that I just became interested in really early on. And I thought, wow, I think AI has real potential here, given how quickly it's changing over time and how quickly it's improving. I think that we have a chance to make a real impact in education with AI, as long as it's done properly, as long as it's done safely, as long as it's done responsibly.
Yeah, that makes total sense, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it. So you mentioned AI, obviously, and you also mentioned AI alts, which isn't a term I'm particularly familiar with, and I'm sure a lot of the listeners wouldn't be either. So could you just clarify what an AI alt is, and also what is AI, Simon? For the
Uh,
uninitiated, people who just hear these names being bundled around, and oh, I can get AI to do that. What's actually happening when you type something into a chatbot, for instance?
So, this is one of the things where I think AI needs to be demystified. So, we need to talk about AI under its general huge umbrella as machines attempting human like activities. And it's always important that we say human like. I think a lot of the providers of AI are trying to get towards this artificial general intelligence, which is a level that would absolutely match anything that a human can do or do it better in terms of the thinking that it can do. Um, and then within artificial intelligence, you've got artificial narrow intelligence, where you've got artificial intelligence that just does one job. So you might have artificial intelligence that, say, checks for defects on production lines. Okay, and that is absolutely all it does. But then, as you've mentioned, you've got much wider scoped AI, such as large language models. And they seem like they're magic. I think people think that they are magic, but they're absolutely not magic. All they've done is they've trained on huge data sets, lots of text that's scraped from the internet, taken from various texts. And then when you input into a large language model, all that it does is takes that text, turns it into data in the form of tokens. And I promise not to get too technical in this, but then it's statistical analysis, that takes us from that prompt that you put in, and then it just gives you a statistically probable answer from it. Now you can tinker with that and you can do all sorts of things. And that's, what we do at Twinkl and what various other companies do as well, to try and make that better, to try and make it as suitable as we can for teachers. Because obviously, don't forget, with the much larger models and the larger companies, they're accessed by absolutely anyone. So they need to make those outputs as good for manufacturers, as I mentioned just then, as they are for educators. But obviously, we Twinkl we help teachers, and therefore we want to make sure that our outputs are as best as they can be for them.
Yeah, so I'm guessing ours. It's all about the contextual information that you give that particular AI
Yeah,
bot
absolutely.
machine.
And
I'm not sure what the right language is even. The
yeah,
AI alt, is
absolutely.
that
And
it?
it's probably important that we don't anthropomorphize AI too much. And um, these are just machines, these are just computers. So, it might feel like you're talking to someone at times, but you're absolutely not. That's just how good it is at trying to mimic human language, is that people often feel like that. And I think it's really important, certainly, and we're kind of diverging a little bit now, but it's really important that we do tell children that and explain to them that they're not talking to an all-knowing being. Certainly not a being, it's just a machine.
Yeah, yeah. It's just looking at references essentially, and as you say, kind of guessing what the best answer might be, depending on what you've asked it, I suppose, in that prompt. Okay, so for teachers who might be skeptical or might be absolutely willing to embrace this, what's the simplest way that you might explain how AI could support classroom practice in maths particularly? Because, well, actually, before I even get there, Simon, if that's all right, AI was not. I say AI again as if we're talking about all AI, but the large language models were not particularly brilliant at maths, I have to say, when they were first brought to the market. I remember having a play with some of them, and asking it to even tell me how many words were in an amount of text that I'd pasted into the screen, and it couldn't even count the number of words accurately that I'd given it. So I certainly wasn't going to trust it when it came to, assessing work or even writing questions other than word problems, maybe that might have been a little bit better. Why was it so? Why did it have such a problem potentially with maths? And is it getting better?
So why did it have a problem? There were numerous reasons why it had problems. One of them was to do with something I mentioned before, which was around tokenization. And that can be to do with the fact if you take just any number, so 140, take the number 140, it might take that as one token. So it might tokenize that as one thing, because these models deal with text. And so all it does when it sees that number is it sees text. Whereas, of course, us as humans will go, if with 140, you might say, okay, 100 410s. That certainly initially wasn't anything like what a large language model was doing. And then if we just add 3 to that number, so 143, the way that it might tokenize that is not as 143 but as 14 and then 3 separately as separate tokens. And therefore you can imagine that then the large language model trying to process that, it just doesn't do very well with it from that point. And then another reason why it wasn't coping very well, and this is more with word problems, and this is something that's actually been improved upon really, really recently. So Google released an article exactly a week ago today, it was actually, where they talked about this decoding process that they refer to as SLED. And essentially what it is that when a large language model decodes all of these tokens back into a response to you, it goes through several layers. And the way that most large language models up to this point have worked is they look at the very last layer and they use that to statistically decide the response that they should give you. And what SLED does is it actually looks back several layers. And I can just give you a very, very quick problem to kind of explain why that would be important. It's the problem that they gave in their article, as it happens, which is a problem where, such and such a body wants to buy 10 items that costs £6 each, but they get a 10% discount if they buy more than 4.
Classic maths problem, Simon.
Classic
Yeah.
maths problem. Now, what's happening there is that the large language model will go, right, what's the really important bit of that? Now, I don't know what you would say, but, me just reading that problem, I'd go, right, well, 10 times 6.
Yeah,
And
I
that's
mean, this is
exactly
like
what.
working with a child, isn't it? You're saying, okay, let's break it down a little bit. What's the most important information? What are we going to look at first? Although, and I've been doing some work around problem solving recently. Obviously, there are issues with that, aren't there? And we know that take it away from machines for a moment. Better problem solvers spend longer exploring the problem to start with, whereas people who struggle with problem solving will look for some numbers immediately and just try and do something with the numbers without necessarily taking the time to it. So is this a similar sort of scenario that's going on here?
Yeah, almost, in that a lot of the models will have preferences for how they start to look at that, and they will simultaneously, initially, early on in these layers that I keep talking about, this isn't literally how it works, because don't forget, this is all just data behind the scenes.
Yeah.
It's not literally reading it, but as it's processing it, it will realize that they're buying more than 4, so they get this 10% discount. But statistically, it will still see the 10 multiplied by 6 as more important. So that's what persists through these layers. So
Right.
what SLED is trying to do, what this new decoding that Google have come up with, is they're applying sort of probabilities to the output from several layers back. So yeah, and I won't get to any more technical than that, but the point being is that they really are trying to make these things more accurate and take in all of the information and therefore make the outputs more accurate. But that's just a couple of examples of why, and you are right, it was bad at maths
It
for
was
a
it
while.
was bad. It was bad, even at simple maths. I don't claim to be any great mathematician particularly, but I felt quite happy that I was more adept at most maths than some of those early large language models.
Yes.
Thank you for not keeping it too technical either, because my limited knowledge of this is at its limit, I think, as we're talking about it. So I appreciate that. So, okay, just going back to what I was asking before then, if it is getting better at maths and we know it has limitations currently, but those are being overcome all the time. It seems like the rate of progress is phenomenal in this area, and we know huge amounts of money being spent on it. But let's take it back to the teacher in the classroom. What's the simplest way that you could explain how AI might support classroom practice in primary maths at the moment?
Well, right now, I think that generally, if you kind of take my rough philosophy on AI, is that AI should be saving me time. It should be developing me as a professional, or it should be improving outcomes for the children. I don't just mean that in terms of results. I mean, genuinely helping them in their education, not just improving a number on a page necessarily, although that might be a natural outcome from it. So, in terms of teaching and learning, I'd just be encouraging teachers to use it as much or as little as they want. I think saying that it's going to wholesale replace things is not a useful way to look at it. And I think, in terms of developing a teacher professionally, perhaps, you know, if I think about my own practice, when I first started teaching, there were topics that I just hadn't taught, because you can't in a few teaching placements, you can't possibly do all of that. And I think I would have appreciated AI to say, right, there's this topic, and I'd like to learn more about its misconceptions or how it might be taught, if there's two schools of thought on how it should be taught, and what are the most popular ways, or whatever. Then I might have started interrogating a model like that. And to go back to something we talked about before, you've got to load that up with context, because, for example, the way that we teach something in this country compared to the way it might be taught in the US might be very,
Yeah.
very different. And therefore, you've got to tell it where you're teaching, what you want to get out of it. It can be really useful to tell a model how experienced you are. Because I've noticed, as now a pretty experienced teacher, sometimes I've put some prompts in, and I've seen the output and thought, no, that's definitely not the most common misconception. I've taught that for years, and it's
Yeah.
not the most
Yeah.
common misconception. And then when you start to encounter things like that, well, maybe rather than asking a model, you know, how should I teach this? You might ask, is there any research? And get it to actually cite the research and where you can go to read that research. Or are there any books that are popular on teaching, this particular topic or group of topics, or whatever it may be? And that's a nice way that I think teachers can dip in or out of it as much as they would like to. And those that have different levels of trust in the technology can, not put all of their faith too far into just the model, or not just the model, for example.
I think, I mean, in my role, I find AI particularly useful for exactly that. So, looking, if I'm writing an article on something, and I wonder if somebody's done some research into this, I find better than Google, asking AI to go and have a look for, what are the most recent papers that have been published, maybe in the last 10 years or whatever, in this particular uh, domain. And then it will go and find them for you, and then you can spend your time reading through them rather than searching for them. So, yeah, I can totally see why that might be useful. Um,
Absolutely. And leaders can help. If I can just elaborate on that a tiny bit in terms of this. If leaders want teachers to go to very specific places for this. You can use tools like, for example, Notebook LM, where that's actually far more focused and it will actually only provide you answers based on the information
Yeah,
that
so
you've given it.
if nobody's explored Notebook LM, I would highly recommend it. In terms of sort of compiling your research together and being able to question the research and things, it's a really useful tool
Absolutely.
to
And
play
then
with.
and then it might be that you've collated all of this research, but then also in the back, and you'll have certainly had this in the past where, great, we've got all this research, but the school has X, Y, and Z policies, kind of calculation policy, for example, or something like that. Well, great thing is you can put that in and therefore get the two things to work together rather than having to work all of that out yourself. Because and this is the thing, isn't it? It's, where do I want to use AI? Well, it's where I feel that my brain falls down. Cognitive load,
Yeah.
my working memory can only manage so much because I'm only human, and the machine can manage all of that and keep all of that information.
Yeah, and we know that teachers are being asked to do more and more. Whenever there seems to be a problem in society, it feels at the moment, that the solution seems to be, well, we could just add it to the curriculum and make sure it's taught at schools, or dental hygiene's not great. Well, we'll get kids to brush their teeth at school. So that time pressure is very real, and it seems to me that AI might be a tool that could help with those sorts of things. I mean, not brushing teeth, but not yet anyway. But in terms of managing that sort of workload.
Yeah, absolutely. And in roles in schools, I've looked at things like cross-curricular links, and I've found myself doing the best that I can, but quite sporadically looking at things, and things, I've done my best, but it's still seemed a little bit disjointed. And I think AI could really help us to really join that up, to gain that time back and just be at least a little bit more efficient with it, really.
Do you think we're going off piste here? I'll just warn the listeners. I'm just thinking of questions now to throw at Simon. But with maths particularly, we've talked a lot about schemes of work and how useful they can be as a starting point for lesson design and things, but they're not necessarily being, or certainly not being, the finished article, and that the teachers' expertise and things is in taking what's there and molding it and shaping it for the class of children that you've got in front of you with their unique personalities and unique contexts and everything else. Sometimes the criticism that I hear leveled at AI tools like report writing, for instance, is that they, create a report which is very generic, and that sort of makes sense because the AI tool doesn't have your particular pupils as a frame of reference, does it? It only has what you've told it about the curriculum and maybe attainment within that. Do you think there needs to be maybe a bit of a mindset change to, okay, well, I can use AI to get me 6/10 or 7/10 of the way to a finished article, but then it's my turn to take over and finish that off and build upon it?
Yeah, and I think we're having that proportion, like you've alluded to, of what you do versus what the AI does. I think that can come at different times. That can come as, you've got an output and then you use a proportion of your time to then refine that, or put it in. Then I do think sometimes as well, there's you can front load that. So it might be that actually you put the real time in at the beginning of it, and then AI is just polishing it and finishing off. And actually what you get out the other end is pretty much ready to go. But I
Yeah, I
think,
can imagine that with something like a letter for a trip or something. I'm going to tell AI I'll need it to write a letter for a trip. I'm sure Twinkl, we've got tools that could help teachers do that. I'm certain we have. I can put in where we're going, what time children need to be in school, how much pocket money they need, all of that sort of information that I've done the thinking about beforehand. I can put that in, and then it should spit out a letter that is pretty much ready to go. Is that the idea?
yeah, absolutely. And then there's little hybrids to that where you can put a request in, and then the AI actually might design a prompt for you where you just fill in some gaps, and then it will add to it. So,
Nice.
and I think that's that's pretty good, where it kind of goes, right, I know the sort of thing you're now asking for. Now I want you to give me a little bit more detail. And then, and I shouldn't have said now I want you to, because it's not, that's not how it's thinking. It's not thinking at all, in fact.
So easy. It's so easy though, isn't it? It's so
It
easy
is
to think of it
so easy.
as a yeah. Yeah. Okay. Just going back to the maths for a moment then. We know where we are currently. I wrote an article for the Chartered College for their AI special recently, where I spent quite a lot of time researching what people think might be possible in the future in terms of providing scaffold and differentiation for individual pupils in a class. Because again, going back to that workload and time pressure, we know we've got 30 individuals in the class. Some children are able to access most of what's been planned. Other children might need a little bit more support to do that. Do you think there's a role for AI in supporting that sort of task, where it's taking the lesson plan as the teacher has designed it and then beginning to personalize it?
Yeah. So, and the different ways in which you can personalize, they've changed over the course of the last few years, and this is where for me it gets a bit difficult, because true personalization would require us to have a lot of data about how groups of pupils, or even as far as individual pupils, have responded to the same or similar adaptations in the past. And in a lot of cases, we just don't have it. I would love, I've thought of ideas before where you've got a device like an iPad or something in the classroom, and because you'll have been there, I've certainly been there teaching, where I've thought about procedural variation maybe in the design of a worksheet. And I've thought, right, well, if they go from this question to this question, it'll make them think in this way and it'll all be
Yeah.
great and everyone's going to get it. And then all of a sudden you've got this child who just, they're not seeing the link between question 4 and 5. So I thought, well, what if you could take a photograph of that and quickly get it into a model, and the model would go, right, so the problem is they can't jump from that question to that question. So you need me to come up with an in-between question or a couple of in-between questions, which just help to bridge that thinking gap.
That would be perfect. Yes. Yeah.
Wouldn't
Can
it
we
be
make
great?
AI
But the
do that,
problem is
please?
we don't really have the data to say what is or isn't useful from that point of view. So, and this is where you just get the model speculating. You might get it hallucinating and saying, oh, this might be a good question, but you're looking at it going, oh no, I'm not sure. And then in all of that time that you've spent messing around with a model, actually, if you, don't get me wrong, if you're an ECT, you're really going to struggle. But maybe me or you, we'd go, I'd just write a couple of questions.
Yeah.
And so why have you messed
Yeah.
around with an iPad in terms of doing that? It's only useful if it's quick and if it's good.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I suppose it's adapting our work practices intelligently, so that we're not spending, because I mean, we're really guilty of this, aren't we? I certainly was, certainly when I first started teaching, I would spend literal days scrolling through the internet looking for a particular worksheet that did a particular thing, where I probably could have written one in half an hour or 45 minutes, but I didn't do that. I tried to find the perfect thing that didn't exist.
Yeah,
So
I've
this
certainly
sounds like
done.
another sort of variation on that, really.
It is, and that brings me to like another point of, because I think the age-old argument of, will it actually help in the lesson, or is it more about the planning aspect of it? And actually, I feel that it can also help with reflection as well. I think that there will be points of lessons, everyone will feel like, everyone listening to this will have had points in lessons where they've gone, that could have gone better. And, with some of the models where you can track them a bit more, if you just put in like, I was teaching a lesson and there was this section of it and I think it could have gone better. Can you just help me reflect on that? Great, fine, you know what I mean? And yeah, actually, in an ideal world, maybe I would go to my head of department with it, but
Yeah. So
They don't have
in that
time
case,
or
Simon, it's not giving you the answers. That's not what you're suggesting. It's prompting you to reflect on the lesson and make your own sort of observations.
absolutely. And, it might be that you do that a couple of times and then actually you just become far more reflective in your practice. So you might do it a bit less. And that's just yet another example of where I'd say the teacher should be in control of this, using it as much or as little as they would like to or that they feel is useful.
I suppose another area of adaptation that I looked at and considered was maybe less academically rigorous, I suppose. But if you have a child who has a particular fascination with, I don't know, football or unicorns or whatever it might be, and they're finding it hard to engage with the lesson. Is there scope, do you think, for AI to take the lesson materials that you've produced and sort of reframe them in a footballing context or a unicorn context or something like that? I know that's fairly superficial, but it could make all the difference to a child's
Yeah,
perception of a lesson.
I have seen lots of examples of that in the past where it's kind of like take this worksheet but make every single question about trains.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and that's potentially an example where AI is quite useful. It almost seems trivial, but what it means is that you're taking the time, maybe coming up with this good worksheet, thinking about the design of the questions very carefully and
yeah.
things like that, and then you realizing, well, actually, I've got this child who might not engage with this so well unless I make this change, and AI can actually just very quickly make that change and make all the contexts about trains or whatever, unicorns or whatever, any other example that you gave before, just to get that pedagogically. Not sure.
Yeah,
Obviously, I don't think
yeah.
I'm not aware of any research that's been done on that.
No, but I'm just thinking about, a child who finds it hard to maintain their engagement in a lesson if there's something they're really passionate about. I'm not suggesting this is going to work for the rest of their education, but it might just be a way to re-engage them in that particular session. And as you say, that's something that if you had two or three of those children in the class, that's a real time consuming task to rewrite all of those questions and try and come up with those contexts. But it is something that AI could do relatively easily for you.
Yeah, potentially. And then, of course, you might even just be able to feed it with a list of interests and say,
Yeah,
well, and then with models increasingly and systems being able to look back at your history of chats, they may even start saying things like, "Oh, would you like me to produce the five altered worksheets that we normally produce, for example?"
yeah,
And yeah, we may even get to a position where it starts doing that, or even potentially, if we had closed systems that schools could use, where you know, so you've got a child who moves from one year group to another, so they're new to you. You barely even know yet that they're interested in trains, but it might even be able to say, well, can I just make you aware that last year on 15 occasions the teacher contextualized it in this way? Do you want to give it a go as well this year? And you being able to do that, because that's useful. That's a conversation that you might not have been able to have with the previous teacher, but the AI has just gone, do you want to give this a go? I think that's relatively useful.
and that's interesting, isn't it? Because that's where we're thinking about AI being a closed system across a whole school or even a trust or something. Whereas at the moment, AI seems to be something that's used very individually by teachers in their own classroom, working with their own children. And we also have to say, you do have to be really careful with what data you share about pupils and those sorts of things with these large language models, because your school or trust will have their own GDPR and data privacy guidelines and things that you do need to check. It's not just cases of just putting in whatever you want to. But thinking to the future, I guess that might be something that might arise in the same way that school sim systems and those sorts of things are available that can keep all that data safe and use it in a way that's appropriate for schools.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's one of the major pitfalls is really understanding that, and, knowing that you can't just put children's work into, like, say, try and market or something like that. And with maths, that's notoriously very, very difficult. But even
Yeah.
with writing, where it might be easier, th- that writing is the intellectual property of the child, and therefore permissions need to be granted. And I think that's something that sometimes could be easily overlooked. So a lot of the documentation that the government's recently produced and the training that they've recently produced, that's come out from the DFE, talks about that in some level of detail, to make sure that we're being as safe as we can, data wise.
No, that sounds good. What I would love to do, Simon, is when this episode goes out, I'd love to, if you're up for this, ask the listeners for any questions that they might have about AI and the use of AI and how they might use it in their classrooms and outside of the classrooms to support their work, and come back with a bit of a Q&A for you. Would you? I'm putting you on the spot here. Would you be up for that?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I mean, I might not have all the answers, and interestingly, if they had a
Well,
question,
if not, you could have an AI model open next to you, just type them in
just
and see
type
what
them
it
in, just
suggests.
yeah, see
Yeah.
see what the model says to it. But no, things change so quickly. When someone listening to this right now, and then they ask the question straight away, if we do the Q&A session in a couple of months, things might have moved on quite a bit from when
Yeah.
they asked the question, interestingly.
Yeah, but I mean, that's teaching generally. It's
Oh,
things just change all the time. But that would be an interesting thing to try and do, because I do think we're going to be talking about this more and more as we move forward, and that there's likely to be lots of questions, I would have thought. So it'd be great to have an expert like yourself on hand who can, help me, because there's so much to learn. There is so much to learn. Um, we're getting towards the end of our time now, I'm afraid. But as I say, it would be great to have you back, Simon, at some point. Just to finish off with, is there a book or a resource or a blog or somewhere that we could go to learn a little bit more about this, or something that's influenced your own thinking, perhaps, in this area?
oof. In the area of AI,
Or about maths or education in general, Simon? Something that's going to be useful for people?
I think AI wise, I would say look for any resource, and there are lots out there which just demystifies it, which, like, and various lots of kind of professional development out there that can do that. AI is understandable. Yes, it's complex, but there are ways in which you can understand how it works, which just demystifies it for people, so that you don't think that it's just a magic box that you're getting answers from. So that's what I'd encourage in terms of that. Mathematically, there's lots of options out there, but I think one of the things, and again, there's a few different books on this, but I found it quite inspiring, particularly when I was doing my A levels, is anything on the history of pi and how it was discovered. I know that might go a little bit slightly beyond a primary audience potentially. However, what I would say is that that's what really ignited my passion for maths, because I don't know if you've ever looked into the history of how they calculated pi, but it really made me think, wow, mathematics really is a discipline. It's not just a set of things that I'm learning that I can then reproduce in an assessment or whatever. I can actually do maths and investigate things mathematically as a career. And so, yeah, anything around the history of the discovery of and the calculation of pi.
I'll add that to my list of things to do. A bit of a deep dive on the other half of this show, Simon, because I love to find, as listeners will know, I love to find out the history of how we ended up at mathematical places. And pi isn't one that I've done yet, so yeah, that'd be great. Thank you for inspiring me to do that one. Of course, if you do want to find out any more about, if you're interested in AI, if you want to follow the work that Simon is doing. You can find him on LinkedIn, of course. Are you anywhere else particularly, Simon, in terms of socials?
LinkedIn is the main thing where I put most of my thoughts, and I've got a blog as well, but everything goes via the LinkedIn.
Yeah. Okay. So look out for Simon Bond on LinkedIn. Give him a follow, and he'll keep you up to date with what's happening in the wonderful world of AI. And I'm certain that this is not the last time that you'll hear him on this show either. If you do have any questions for him, just drop them at the usual place, either Twinkl podcast, either primary maths podcast at twinkl.co.uk, or give me a follow on socials too, and just send me a message on there. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon, Simon. It has been a pleasure to talk to you, even if I didn't understand absolutely everything you said. I'll just feed it into a large language model later and get it to explain it for me.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to coming on again.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Take care. Cheers.